Well, now to more details on where the money is coming from for President Trump's border wall. We're learning that schools and daycare centers for military families are losing millions of dollars in order to fund the wall. Schools for the children of U.S. military members from Kentucky to Germany to Japan will be affected. According to the Pentagon, a daycare center at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland will also have its funds diverted. The move comes as the Pentagon announced earlier this week that it will be pulling $3.6 billion in funding from 127 Defense Department projects. I wonder, Willie, how Mitch McConnell will handle that information that impacts his state.
One school serving military families along the Kentucky-Tennessee border will lose funding to President Trump's border wall. The New York Times reports this morning the Pentagon's decision to divert $62.6 million in funding from building Fort Campbell's new school will mean more than 550 6th, 7th, and 8th graders will continue to use classrooms at the military base's aging middle school. Conditions at that school are so cramped, teachers have been forced to use mobile carts to store their books and lessons plans, and since the cafeteria isn't big enough, students have had to eat lunch in the school library. According to the Times, students stuffed into makeshift classrooms within classrooms will continue to strain to figure out which lesson to listen to and which one to filter out. As a reminder, Fort Campbell is home to the 101st Airborne Division, as well as special operations units deployed to Afghanistan and to Iraq. This move to divert funding from its school comes after Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who of course represents Kentucky, touted his commitment to helping the base's families, writing in an op-ed at the beginning of the year. McConnell wrote, "Our Commonwealth is the proud home of military installations critical to our national defense. I secured much-needed assistance for Fort Campbell, Fort Knox, and the Bluegrass Army Depot, helping the men and women serving there to keep America safe." The question Mika posed is a good one. What will Mitch McConnell say? Well, his office is saying we wouldn't be in this position if Democrats would work with Republicans on border security. We wouldn't have to be in a place where the president is transferring funds from a middle school on a military base to get his border wall built.
I just wonder if he's talking about perhaps coming up with a deal for $21 billion with Democrats that would have secured border funding and then walking away from it. And that's why Mitch McConnell doesn't want to even do anything on gun legislation or anything else, because he knows he can't trust the president. So do I expect the president to be, do I expect Mitch McConnell to try and waffle his way out of this? Absolutely. But what he can't waffle his way out of is the senators that it may hurt, whether it be in Colorado, you have re-elections up there, in Maine. The Trump campaign has cited that they want to try and flip New Mexico. Well, taking away money from military installations in Mexico is not a good way to do that. So I think, just going back to Joe's point about the chess pieces, I think Donald Trump will find it very hard to pass these chess pieces as the campaign continues if he keeps doing things like this.
Too early.
Sorry.
Way too early. Gene
I was thinking about going there, and I was like, no.
No, let's just move beyond that. So you have Mitch McConnell talking about, think about this. Mitch McConnell talked about, Gene, getting that money for those bases to, quote, keep America safe.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has raided that money now, and he's diverting it to a vanity project that John Kelly, that Lindsey Graham, that John Cornyn, that so many Republicans said will not help, not help keep the border secure. But he's actually taking real money away from real military construction issues and readiness issues. And you look at Tom Tillis, what was it, $80 million that he stole from North Carolina? And while a hurricane is smashing in to North Carolina, Tom Tillis' state, he's talking about Alabama. Donald Trump doesn't give a damn about North Carolina, and apparently Tom Tillis can't do anything to stop that. And you go down that list, Martha McSally didn't have what it took to protect Arizona from being looted. You look at the rest of the people on the list. Lindsey Graham, all the golfing in the world couldn't stop the president from looting $11 million from the good people of South Carolina, or $8 million from Cory Gardner in Colorado. I mean, if they're kissing up to Donald Trump, around the clock, and he still goes to their military bases and steals money for a project that was already funded to the tune of $21 billion in a bill that Stephen Miller nixed. Donald Trump's problem shouldn't be with Democrats. It should be with Stephen Miller. They would have already had the wall built by now if it weren't for Stephen Miller.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There were deals to be made on immigration that's been clear from the start, and Donald Trump won't make those deals. $3.6 billion is a small part of the Defense Department budget, but it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money, as we see today, that affects the states of Republican senators who are up for re-election. So, Martha McSally is not going to be happy about this. It puts her in a bad position. It puts all of them in bad positions. It puts Cory Gardner in a bad position, and Mitch McConnell. Yet I predict you're going to hear nothing honest coming from these senators about this because they're all scared of Donald Trump. And you know what these first two stories we've done this morning have in common: the Sharpie gate and the money that's been taken for the wall is that everything is always all about Donald Trump. And if we haven't learned that about him, total disregard for the political position or feelings or whatever of anybody else, if we haven't learned that by now, then when are we going to learn it? I mean, it's been clear from the beginning. And it's clear right now. It's just all about him. How many times does he have to act pathological, or I think the term of art is crazy, before we say, gee, he's crazy?
He's just eating one chess piece after another, going for the rook next. So David Ignatius, just talking about real life consequences for people that don't, it's just numbers on a screen. I represented in Congress, I represented NAS, Pensacola, Whiting, Hurlburt Field, Eglin, Tyndall. It represented all these bases where men and women would be deployed. And of course, the deployments have become more rapid. They've become more numerous. They've been more crushing on families. And so when our men and women go off to war, go off to defend this nation, they want to know that the families that they're leaving behind are being taken care of. So this is not just political theater by Donald Trump. There are real life consequences. And on the Armed Services Committee, we put this under readiness. Are the troops going to be ready? Is military construction such that they're being taken care of, that they can go on one deployment after another, and they don't get to a breaking point? This, actually, where you're gutting money from facilities that children and spouses and family members use, that goes right to the heart of readiness and how these troops are doing.
Joe, military families are, I think, close to sacrosanct these days in our country. There's a national feeling of obligation, in some ways of guilt, towards the families whose members have suffered in these very difficult wars. Fort Campbell, I know from my experience traveling, is a place where a lot of the warriors who serve in special units, task forces, who are doing the hardest part of this fighting. Often you'll ask where you're from, and the answer is Fort Campbell. So we need to do more reporting and see exactly what's being cut here, what effects it will have on the families of these soldiers who've been deployed and the community. But I was with a group of senior military families last night, and they talked, must have been 45 minutes, about the ethic of service that is part of their culture. It's absolute, uncompromising service to their country, going and doing what their country asks, hoping, expecting that their families will be taken care of. So I think something like this, robbing money from one account intended for these people that country as a whole feels a great debt toward, and putting it instead in what in so many ways seems a vanity project, Trump's wall, it just isn't going to sit right. So we need to do more reporting, but it sticks in the craw.
Well, it does stick in the craw, and it can be called a vanity project because everybody, Republicans, Democrats, independents, experts, all said, while Republicans were in control of Congress, that the wall actually doesn't make America safer, that it was, in fact, a vanity project. Just go back and look at the quotes of the Republicans during that time. Willie, I just really quickly need to go to you here because obviously I saw it when I served in Congress and after, but you see it every day, this commitment that these warriors make, the sacrifices that their families make, that their spouses make, that their children make. And we would hope that the United States government would take care of those who take care of us every day. It's not happening in these cases, certainly not in North Carolina, not in South Carolina, not in Arizona, not in Colorado, not in Texas, not in all these states where Donald Trump gutted money from these facilities to take care of their children.
Yeah, and the sad and painful truth in this country is that we don't take care of the people who go fight the wars for us. We say we will. It's part of the contract we sign with them implicitly, that if they go take care of the defense and fight the wars for us, we'll take care of them when we get home. On so many fronts, we don't do a good job, but this is eminently preventable. And to take money from families who are back on the base, who need this school, this has been something that's been boiling and festering for years, the idea that the school needs to be built, this overcrowded school. This is sick. And just to give you one idea, I want to point how the rest of the Senate feels about this, Republicans in particular. The New York Times points to an interview Lindsey Graham gave to CBS all the way back in February. This topic was out there. He was asked about this, and he said, quote, "It's better for middle school kids in Kentucky to have a secure border. We'll get them the school they need, but right now we've got a national emergency on our hands." So if you're looking for Republicans in the Senate and in Congress to stop this move by the president, you're probably looking for something that's not going to happen.
Well, and one more shameful moment for Lindsey Graham, Mika, because Lindsey was one of those Republicans when the GOP controlled Washington, who, and you can go back and look at the quote, just like you can look at his quotes about Donald Trump, saying that he would destroy the Republican Party and it would deserve to be destroyed if he ever got their nomination, and he would be a terrible president. But you can go back and look at Lindsey's quote, I think from 2017, where he said building a wall didn't seem to be a good use of money. Now he's talking about national emergencies and actually gutting facilities for our men and women in uniform and their children.
It's crazy. So,
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.